Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect as usual. So, a little behind the scenes action. I'm shooting this later than I normally do, so I'm a little off. So hopefully I'll still be useful to some of you. But I also acquired my foot model from the Purple Room because I got a question from Eric. Eric said, you posted a video of sled dragging for ankle mobility, and he wanted me to break down the thought process for why this may help with ankle mobility where other strategies have failed. And so a couple of things. I think when we're talking about ankle mobility, we can't ignore what happens above, and we can't ignore what happens within the foot itself. And some of the foot stuff is still ill-defined, I think, nor even defined in some cases where there's a tremendous amount of complexity in all those little bones and such. And so what I want to do is talk through a little bit of a simplified model of the foot that might help with a little bit of perspective as far as why this sled dragging concept actually helps with the ankle mobility. I think one of the things that people are looking at, because they use these defined three-dimensional sagittal, frontal, and transverse planes, is because they get a little confused because they start thinking that the ankle moves in the sagittal plane, when the reality is it rotates just like every other joint. So it moves on a helix, just like every other joint does, which is why you see all the diagonal angles and such for axes of motion as described in the literature. But again, I'm going to really simplify this to a great degree. But when you're trying to drive sagittal motions, there are things that can interrupt this because it can stop the rotation that would naturally occur within the mortise, within the subtalar joint, the movement of the calcaneus, and the movement through the remainder of the foot. So in the sled dragging video, if you watch that video, I was walking to my left, and so I have a right foot in hand, so we're going to talk about the right foot as far as how we're going to gain this ankle mobility. And one thing that I want you to recognize is this fifth ray has its own little axis of rotation. And so we're going to use that to help us acquire ankle mobility. So we need this little guy to have its normal rotation. So if you have one of those little pinky toes that tucks under the fourth toe, what I want you to recognize is that fifth ray is, and my definition, is externally rotated. And what we need is to capture normal ankle mobility is we need to make sure that it can externally rotate, which would supinate the foot, and it needs to internally rotate, which would provide us a measure of pronation. And so I think a lot of people are lacking this fifth ray mobility, and so they get stuck in these early phases of propulsion, and they either roll off to the medial aspect of the foot, or they have some other compensatory strategy. So as we walk through, I'm going to use this as a surface, as we walk through this lateral sled drag, and we land in this supinated position. So we're going to land in relative tibial external rotation, but the talus is already moving towards the traditional plantar flexion adducted position of closed chain pronation. But I'm going to land on this lateral aspect, and what I can do is I can actually put pressure through the fifth ray right there, and I can capture what I would call internal rotation of that fifth ray. And in doing so, as I land, I've got a plantar flexed adducted talus, and I can move the tibia from external rotation to internal rotation. So now I start to capture a much more realistic and effective pronated position of the subtalar joint. I'll land on the medial aspect of the first ray, which will prevent me from going into too much pronation. I'll capture what we would traditionally call dorsiflexion, as I have a normal closed kinetic chain pronation position of the ankle. And then as I push off from the medial aspect of the foot, I'll have a useful propulsive first ray to push off of because of the landing mechanics of landing towards the inside of that first ray as I push off. So I get this full rotation of the tibia across. I capture a normal subtalar joint position for pronation, which will allow me to access a lot of the ankle mobility that people are lacking. Once again, they tend to get stuck in this position where I don't have normal rotation through the fifth ray, it limits my ability to dorsiflex. And so if I can capture that with that lateral sled drag motion where I'm rolling from the outside of the foot to the inside of the foot and rotating the tibia across as I go, I pick up a lot more ankle mobility. So Eric, I hope that answers your question. The foot's a really, really confusing place to look, but I think there are some elements that we can always utilize to simplify things. There are also iterations of the foot up the chain, which we can talk about at a future date. But anyway, I wanted to get that out to you and give you an idea of why I think that lateral sled drag is a useful activity to recapture some of that ankle mobility. So I will see you guys tomorrow at the Coaches and Coffee call on Thursday morning, 6 a.m. Eastern Time, Bill Standard Time. There's already a bunch of people that have contacted me about being there, so I'm looking forward to that, and I will see you tomorrow.